Well, I know we're seeing it here. Okay. Well, welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study. We're going to be continuing our lessons in the book of Ecclesiastes. One of the things that I'd like to bring up is that we're not doing an in-depth study. We're not diving in and doing verse by verse and everything on Ecclesiastes like the book of Proverbs. One person that I had a comment from on our previous Proverbs class, someone was saying, well, we're looking for a verse by verse. So the intent is not to go through and try to cover verse by verse, but to kind of look at the bigger picture. I kind of call it like a beginner's class, like an overview, so that we get an idea of what the books are about and still be able to, I guess, mine out some of the greater lessons that are being taught to us. This is lesson 2. The lesson 1 we did a couple weeks back because I wasn't here last Wednesday, so we'll do a little bit of a review on it, and then we'll move on into the second lesson tonight. So as we talk about observations, kind of looking at the book of Ecclesiastes overall, the writer is Solomon. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but one of the things that we know that you have this sense that he's lost enthusiasm for life. Who hadn't done that? He just kind of, what's the purpose? Some guys, we used to call it the middle age crisis. You get a point in your life where you go, what was this all for? What was it about? And so it's kind of an honest one. He records his feelings as he's going to search to try to find out what is the meaning? What is the meaning of life other than that, we were born, we breathe, we exist, and then we die? So he sets forth in the beginning of the book kind of what he has found, and then he's going to end the book with a conclusion. So he starts out identifying the situation. Good evening, Eileen and Terrell. I see you joined us online. So he's going to start out with this dilemma of this lack of enthusiasm for life and that it's all vain. It's all, now not in the sense of, vanity that somebody was very vain, but didn't have value, couldn't find the value. Everything that he would do was not. So he is going to set forth those final conclusions, what he's come up with, and then he's going to go through and talk about it in the different aspects. And that's what we'll look at as we go into this. The word Ecclesiastes, you might have recognized it from ecclesia in the New Testament. The Greek ekla is to call. Ecclesia in the New Testament is assembly. We see where the Christians had ecclesia, had assembled. And so it kind of has that sharing, that root there. This is though ecclesia is, Ecclesiastes is one who calls the assembly, who's calling out to the assembly. It never received that name when he wrote it. We don't even know really what the first name it was. It wasn't until hundreds of years later that when the people who came together to translate the book from Hebrew into Greek, the Septuagint, the 72 in Alexandria, had come up with the name for this book. And so they're the one who had given this name to it. So just a little background on it. The one thing we do see is called the preacher. And so that's another reason I think that the translators, when they took it from the Hebrew to the Greek, that they looked at that and said, well, preacher is the one who calls the assembly. And around 925 BC, so this puts it again right in the time of Solomon when he was here and when he was alive and everything. We see a lot of things just things in the book itself. Verse 1:1, a king in Jerusalem. 1:16, wisest person who'd ever ruled over Jerusalem. 2 verses 4 and 6, builder of great projects. Chapter 2:8, of much wealth. Chapter 2, verse 8 as well, a processor of many things, large wealth, harems. And so there's a lot of things that we can see that really does help us to understand that this is Solomon who wrote it. The theme, again, is, I think most know that it is that word vanity. Usually, but what's interesting is its breath. It's very similar to the way that the word vapor, whenever James talks about life is like a vapor, what is it? A mist. You see it, and where is it? It's gone, right? So I think we got to rephrase ourselves sometimes when we think of that. When you hear him saying, vanity of vanity, everything is vain, vanity and vanity, and we hear it over and over and over and over in the book of Ecclesiastes, he's just saying everything's like a vapor. Everything that we do, everything's just gone. Where's the substance in it? And so that's what he is trying to proclaim is, what is the meaning of life? What are we doing? Where do we get our satisfaction? Where do we have a sense of accomplishment? And that's why I think in the modern terms, we see that in that point in our lives where we go, what was this all for? I'm watching it happen to my boys because they're hitting their middle 30s and talking to them and, listening to what they're going through. And I'm going, oh, you're at that spot. Because, before then, like I used to always say, I had an old 71 Ford pickup beat up. I could drive it all day. It didn't embarrass me. You know why? Because I wasn't going to be driving that thing. I already had a brand new one already lined up. When I got that better job and I accomplished all these things and I was going to get that truck. And then I turned 35 and guess what? I'm still driving. And then you go, whoa, wait a minute. Well, what was it for? I wasn't. I actually had a better truck. But that's kind of that feeling you get. And that's what Solomon, he's reached that age where he's like, looking back on everything. Now, it's estimated that he's probably writing this closer to the age of 60, which, I can relate to that too. When you look back at all the things that you've done in your life, you look back and you go, why didn't I do this? Or why didn't I get satisfaction? And all those things that we are struggle with. So everything under the sun, that's another term that sometimes we struggle with. Vanity, when he says that, vanity of vanities, think of temporariness, worthless, no value, vapor. Under the sun is in the physical world while we're alive. So when he says, everything under the sun is everything in this world, this dimension, is what he's referring to when he does that. So he says in verse 1:13 right away, he sets out the conditions of what he says he's going to do. He says, I set out my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. Same thing, mist, kind of no value, chasing wind. Anyone ever chased a dust devil? What was the value of that? And so now, who's Solomon again? Solomon is the young man. He's King David's son. He's the one that when he took over and he became king, he was sacrificing at the tabernacle, and he has a dream, and the Lord comes to him and says, Solomon, what would you want? Whatever you ask, I will give you. And he asked the Lord, he said, Lord, give me the wisdom to be able to lead your people. And the Lord said, you know what? You got it. You're going to be the wisest man that has ever lived. No one will ever be smarter than you. Einstein, nobody. Nobody has ever come along that's been smarter than Solomon. And then the Lord said, you know what? I'm going to give you what you didn't ask for. I'm going to give you all that wealth, all that power. So this is the guy who had it all. Wouldn't you think? He's got it all. And toward the end of his life, he's sitting there going, it was all what? So now what his conclusion is, and this is very important, because I know when I used to study the book of Ecclesiastes, sometimes I go, man, he needed an antidepressant drug or something. What's wrong with this guy? Come on, snap out of it. You're a man of God. You should be, your faith. And that's the point. What he has discovered is everything that's done under the sun in this world without God, it doesn't have the same value. It's not there. And tonight we're going to see how he starts that out and shows it. And so as we divide the book up, we're to look at the total division of it. that introduction, chapter 1, verse 1 through 15, and then we go to the exploration. This is where he's going to explore. He's going to go off and he's going to check out and try to find. Now, he is smart, and this is one thing. A lot of times, another aspect that I used to kind of think and blame him for was, well, if you're that smart, why'd you do such stupid things? And that's something that's wrong. And I'll point out, he even says he did not do it foolishly. And there's a difference between what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's another thing that in this lesson tonight we'll wrap up and show. It wasn't like he was just going out and just committing sinful stuff, but he was exploring and going to the max. And so that's the middle part of it. The end of it is a summary, which he'll come back to and do that. So there's 4 parts to this pursuit, 4 things he's going to talk about as he is trying to find the purpose to life. He's going to talk about the first one he goes after is pleasure, is seeking after that, seeing what value is in that. The second one is wisdom and folly, foolishness, dumbness. After seeking them both and seeing and exploring them, is there any purpose in that? In the pleasures? What's the purpose in wisdom and folly? And then meaningful work. What you accomplish, what you're doing. And then power and wealth. If you look at that, those are the things that we really do kind of value and want to have in our lives and say, okay, this is the purpose for it. And how do I accomplish it? So the first one he looks at, and the one we're going to deal with in the class tonight, is his first pursuit is looking at pleasure. And it's fitting because one of the things that you're talking about is pleasure. We're talking about things that make you feel good. What gives you pleasure? And so he's going to go through there and describe it. So the very first thing he says in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. He didn't find any value in it. So he begins that search where we do the same thing. If a little bit of chocolate is good, what is a whole lot of chocolate? If a little bit's good. And so, looking at, well, if this feels good, then how far? What else can I get, that's going to make me feel good about life and the experiences and the sensations that I'm getting. And there we'll get into more detail because there's a lot of things that we can look at that he's going to talk about. It's kind of a self-talk. That's what's kind of interesting. This is like a diary. It's kind of like he wrote this book. He said, I said to myself, I was sitting there talking to myself going, okay, come, let's check this out. Let's test. Let's see if I can find value in pleasure. Now remember, what he's comparing this to is pleasure without God, okay? And that's key. Always keep that in your mind. So, because these things within themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. Nothing wrong with them. So sometimes when we read Ecclesiastes, we think, it's, these things we're not supposed to do. But no, that's not it. And he's not doing it as a fool, okay? This is the wisest man in the world. So he knows exactly where the line is. And there's some things he did in his later life we'll talk about as well, and tonight we will. But don't look at it like he just let the guardrails down. But he is seeking to see what is the pleasure without God. How can I find my life in these pleasures? And so the first one is laughter. We all love a good comic, right? A good joke. There's something about it that, kind of suspends, reality for a moment, and you just laugh. Something that breaks you out in laughter. He said, I said of laughter, it is madness. And of pleasure, what does it accomplish? So what is it? Laughter's good, okay? This is one of those things where he's not saying you got to be stoic, be like, you can't laugh like you're doing. You need to smile. Laugh. So, but what is, and laughter is very, very healthy. That's one of the things, but, there's sometimes it's silly. It's ridiculous. There's some comics I've listened to over the years. It's like, okay, no. That's just what I have found, though, and this is a little bit off is that if you can make people laugh about sinful things, they accept it. It makes it more acceptable. Point. There was a sitcom that came out in the 70s called Three's Company. You want to remember that? There's a few of us that remember that. And it was hilarious. John Ritter was hilarious. Don Knotts was the landlord, and he was living with two girls, and that was taboo in the 70s. In the 70s, okay, not now. Now it's just okay. It doesn't matter, right? But hold on. So in the 70s, there were some things that were very taboo still. That were like, no. One was guys and girls just living together. The other one was homosexuality. Was something very still taboo. That people were still very quiet about it. Well, Don Knotts was their landlord, and he was gay. And John Ritter had to play like he was gay in order to make it look like it was okay to live with these two girls because he's gay, right? So then they'd go, oh, well, that's okay. And so, no, Don Knotts wasn't gay. He was, I think he wasn't. Because there were two landlords, another one. But so he would always make jokes like John was gay, like wink, wink. I know you like boys, and ha 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 ha. And we laugh. And I was laughing right along with it. But you see what happened? You start laughing at something that's sinful, and then it starts to become what? Not so bad. That ain't so bad. That's the way filthy language happens, dirty jokes, things like that start to creep in, and you start laughing about things that are not really appropriate. And the next thing you know, those things that aren't so appropriate aren't so offensive anymore because you can laugh at it. So that little bit, but so again, laughter in of itself is very healthy, very necessary. God created us to laugh. It's not something unusual. But the point was here, again, if that's what you're seeking, how long did that laugh last? There are some Christian comics, hilarious. Oh my. There's one I watch all the time, and I just about fall out of the couch. But in about 5 hours, I'm back to reality. Laughter's over. I walk outside and look at everything else around me, and I'm going, So what did it do? Did it satisfy? Was laughter where it's at? You see? And that's what Solomon's saying. He's like, yeah, it's great. You can laugh, He amused himself with comedians. We know the kings did this. They had entertainers that would come in, and clowns and games and different things and plays and things that would make them laugh and enjoy. But guess what? 5 hours later, it's like that movie you go to in the theater. And you get that experience. You're sitting there eating that popcorn. Woo, you get that sensation, that experience, and you walk out. And for a little while, it lingers. It's still there, isn't it? You're like, wow, that was a good movie. And you talk about it. Maybe 2 or 3 days, you'll kind of reflect back. But you're stimulating yourself to try to get back that emotion of the boogeyman that jumped out, or that amazing scene that just all of a sudden that plot popped open. You're going, wow, I never saw that coming. But it's gone, isn't it? And so what do? Well, we want that again, don't we? You see, our brain has this dopamine monster in us, and that is a hormone that basically gives us endorphins, gives us the happy response to things. And all these things we're talking about, that really what Solomon is talking about here is kind of things that would produce this dopamine sensation, this like after you laugh, how you feel. You feel good, don't you? You don't get sad and usually break out crying. I mean, not crying, laughing. I've seen people do that, but I'm not talking about that. But I mean, you feel great. It releases those endorphins, but then it's over. And so that's where he's saying, it's kind of crazy. He's saying, because I can enjoy it, but then it's vanity. What is vanity again? It's gone. It's gone. So I'm back to where? Getting up in the morning, going to work, trying to retell the joke and make the other guys laugh about it. But you can't really tell it right. So, they don't experience it. So, you're like, and it's fleeting, right? And so that's one of them. The next one is very applicable as well, and probably hits closer to home to most people is, and here he's talking about wine, but it's really alcohol. So I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there was for the sons of men to do under the heavens the few years of their lives. So now, he did not become an alcoholic, okay? He didn't say that. Look what he says. He said, guiding me wisely. My mind was guiding me wisely. And how to take hold of foolishness. How far can I go with it? He understood. That's why I say that, it wasn't like he just went out and went on a binge and just drank alcohol and was a stumbling drunk and just never was sober. He explored those sensations that what he got from alcohol. And it was the same like laughter, in other words. And it's so true, isn't it? You get a feeling, it gives you some relaxation, even if you just drink a little, and you can control it even, but guess what? It's fleeting. And so the spiral, though, is we want to keep satisfied, right? We want that dopamine. We want that good feeling. And if that's what we're trying to get out of life is humor and that feeling that alcohol can give us, it's going to go away. And guess what you want? You want it again. And then you want it again. And you want it again. It's like crack cocaine. You get a little bit of it, it gives you that great feeling, that drug, and then you're like, you drop, and you go, I liked it, I got to have more. So what? It takes more and more and more and more to get what little pleasure you got with little stimulus, and more stimulus required in order to get that achievement of that dopamine. So the same thing. And so what did it accomplish him, he's saying? And he sees that again. He says he tried to look at that from the point of view, he probably, as a king, was looking around and seeing all the people, that were under him, serving him. And what did they live for? I mean, he was on top of the game, man. I mean, he was it. He was the top guy. I mean, he had all the money, all the wisdom, all the power. But what about the people who served in his banquets, who served the dinners and cleaned up and did the maintenance and stuff, and looking around as he traveled and seeing people working out in the fields and stuff? And it's like, and probably saw that, wine was something that they would use to kind of alleviate the misery that they were experiencing in the reality of life. You work hard, you're going to have sore muscles, You're going to get sunburned. You're going to dehydrate. You're going to get hurt. It's going to be exhausting. These things are just going to happen to you. And then so you come home and you want relief. You want to feel good. So laughter, wine. The third one, especially from his point of view, was building projects. So he took off in that direction. He said, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of waters for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. A forest. That's a lot. A lot of trees. So he built everything, and we know that Solomon had some great works. One of the greatest one, the most famous one is what? The temple. Building the temple. He had a lot of, during Solomon's time was the most peaceful time during all of Israel's history in the kingdom. Solomon didn't have to go to war or fight anybody. His dad took care of that. David had wiped out and suppressed and just silenced all of the enemies around Israel. So he's sitting in peace. Now there was some expansion that Solomon did toward the north, towards like into Palestine and up, Palestine south, but going up towards Syria and up towards Turkey. He kind of expanded, but there was no battles. Solomon. So it's like, so he had a lot of things that he did. And yet, he says, again, all these ambitious works, and we get a lot of pleasure out of it, don't we? Think of some of the things that you've done. Even mowing my grass, there's times just getting the grass cut and looking at it and going, look at that. It looks nice. It looks nice. Take the weed eater, trim it, and got flowers and stuff. You look at it and go, man, that is cool. It gives you self-worth, and it's important. But you know what happens next week? I got to go mow that grass again. Ugh. By the end of the summer, I can't wait till it freezes, right? You know, we can appreciate, and it is another thing that is important, because I feel that we need to be able to do things with our hands, whether it's simple or just accomplish something and take pleasure from it. He's not saying don't do anything. But again, what are we talking about? We're keeping it in the position of, I'm doing it without no purpose except that project. And if we're doing it for that, then we have to draw our satisfaction from either laughter, pleasure, or work. And it will never satisfy. That's the conclusion he keeps coming to, is that all these things on this physical world under the sun without God is worthless. It has no value. This is the why people who have no God, don't believe in God, they so diligently seek after these very things that Solomon is describing here, and has said there's no vain, it's all just gone, right? It just goes away. But they keep on working harder. They keep on going and trying to please themselves, and it just falls short, because they wake up, that sensation is gone, because that's all it was, right? So the next one was sensuality. You know, looking at it, he said, I bought male and female slaves. I had homeborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who had preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasure of men and many concubines. Nothing. You know, I think most people could say there's one thing I've never been able to experience, to enjoy. Like, I've never gone on a cruise ship. Not that I really want to, but I've never gone, but they say it's wonderful. And, you know, there's an exciting part about it. I'll never be able to. I'm not going to have the money. I'm not going to go on a cruise ship. There's some things in life that, you know, I probably never get to experience, and it would be very wonderful. But he experienced it all. That's what he's basically saying. And so everything about what he was doing in life was the perfect world for a person. Mm-hmm. Oh, the pleasures and singers and the pleasures of men. Yeah, that's I don't know. You got me. I'll be honest with you. That well, see, that's where I had went. I was thinking was that the pleasures of men. That last line was, and I had a lot of women. That the way it's set, you know, it's kind of Gary. New King James. Yeah, it's a. Yeah, I would have to look at that. I would have to really deep dive on that. To, well, that's true too. No, you're right, and that's why I'm not going to argue against it, because, you know, it says singers and the pleasures of men and many concubines. But I'll get back to you, because it is a possibility. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and I I have a source I'll dig up and dig into that. But because I had always kind of seen that as because of the concubines. Because, in 1 Kings 11:3, we see where he had 700 concubines and like 300, 700 wives. 700 wives and 300 concubines. Yeah, a little ridiculous. Now, in that day, in that custom, that's a whole nother discussion when we talk about this. A lot of people have said, well, that was his great downfall. No, his great downfall, because concubines and these things were something that were customary for kings and such. I mean, David had them. We go all the way through the kings. Not that we're judging Abraham. A lot of the men had it, and a lot of it had to do with heritage, producing male offspring, different things like this, different things. Not that God patterned it or approved it. I'll just say that much, okay? Because just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean God said, oh, hey, I put my approval on it. It's just something that was customary. A lot of, especially at the king's level, they married other princesses from other nations in order to, like a peace treaty. And, there were times where even they would swap children. Because then if you attack me, I'm holding your son. I'm going to hold on to him. And so if you attack, the Muslims did it too. They did it when they took Constantinople, and they had some treaties where they took the princes of, I think, the Armenians and brought them in and trained them and said, if you attack, guess what? Your kid. So it was a way as well. So some of this expansion, and it doesn't mean that every one of them he had an intimate relationship with. Doesn't really necessarily mean that either. But he does. Yeah, sometimes people have taken the idea of them having these concubines, but they were not wives. But again, like I said, it's a big subject in itself that I think needs to be discussed, because I'm like you, some people, and there is a religion today, right? That, the Mormons, the only reason the mainstream Mormon church stopped it, you know why? Is because when they were wanting to be accepted in as a state, Congress mandated they had to make that illegal. That's the only reason they went to monogamy and not polygamy. Which, to me, if that's your faith, you should stand up for. Oh, anyway. So yeah, it was one of the things. Yes. What's that, wives? And I keep going back to, what did God intend? God didn't create man and woman in a concubine. Right. Well, and that, even Jesus, when he talks about marriage, he takes them back to the creation. One man, one woman, so, and I'm telling you, man, when anybody says they want more than one wife, I'm saying, you're nuts. Are you kidding me? I got one that wants to kill me. Can you imagine? And I don't want them talking with each other, because I know I'll be booted out, because I would definitely be outnumbered. No, so, and just look at every one of them. If you go back and look at them, look at Hagar, look at Sarah, right? All of them, the brothers. You just go through the concubines and the drama and no. So anyway, I think that what I've always kind of understood this last portion, that last part there about pleasure of men and many concubines, was kind of like pleasures of men, hint, hint, concubines. In other words, I had all availability to have any type of intimate relationship I wanted with the most gorgeous, whoever I wanted. Now, what is interesting is we know that his many wives was one of his most sinful downfalls. But let's clarify. it wasn't because they were concubines of many wives. It was because he married Gentile women who then took him into idolatry. And that was the biggest sin. I mean, literally on the Mount of Olives, he built a temple to all these gods, and apparently even sacrificed to Moloch, some of these gods. I mean, so there was that part, but this I just wanted to bring that up. But yeah, but again, it's the same thing, isn't it? I mean, all the things, even in intimate relationships like that, they don't last. And people who have addictions like this, sexual addictions and things, they become more and more and more entrapped in it, to the point where there's been studies done that have shown that like pornography is as addictive as cocaine. And once you get into that, it's that hard, because you have to have it. You get into that trap to where you're just going to keep going. And so that's the problem. Why? Because you're, again, trying to satisfy yourself physically without the spiritual. And that's always going to fall short. You're going to be miserable. You're going to seek it more. That's why we have all these addictions. We have an addiction for all sorts of things. We have food addictions, right? We have sex addictions. We have drug addictions. We have alcohol addictions. We have all sorts of things. And it really kind of fundamentally, I think, when it's without God, it's because they cannot get enough. They have to keep going. So he talks about the fifth thing is the good life overall. He said, I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. This is where he's saying, I didn't get dumb. During all that was going on, I still was smarter than any person around. God didn't take my intellect away from me. And all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse him. I saw something that was good. I had it, did it. I enjoyed it. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor and was my reward for all my toil. So he did get some satisfaction. See, he did look at the temple that he built and said, man, that's wonderful. But you know what? Even that wears off. Like when you buy a new car, and when you get that new thing, that brand new, beautiful thing you buy, and you're just so excited, it gets you excited, and you almost get a little endorphins, you kind of get excited. You wash your car every day, and you shine it up, and you like take care of it, and give it a year, and you're like, doesn't have the new car smell, doesn't look as sharp anymore, because it couldn't sustain it, in other words, and that's the way all of these things are. I saw that there was a reward. In other words, I had accomplished some things. But again, the overall value of it without the spiritual side of it is something that he said, I concluded, and thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there's no profit under the sun. Here's these words again. So when it comes to doing this just for that pleasure, whatever it is, that it's going to fall short. Now, God wants us to enjoy life. Everything that we've been describing again, that's why I keep bringing this back. He wants you to enjoy it, but it's in a proper way. But that's not your ultimate pleasure. You cannot sustain that, and that's the thing, You can't like bank it and then use a little of it. It's not something that will build up and you can have a bunch of it and it's going to last. It's going to keep needing to be replaced. They're very short-lived. Now, there's two types of pleasure, legitimate and illegitimate. In other words, sinful, not sinful. Legitimate, even non-sinful pleasures, they're just for the moment, right? That's what we've been talking about. That's what I want us to separate. Solomon wasn't out doing, we cannot say he went out and did all these illegitimate pleasures, but either one. The one thing with legitimate pleasures is fleeting. The one with illegitimate that's sinful, you know what that brings? Guilt and shame. And you sear your conscience. In other words, you get so used to doing it. The first time, if it's something that's illegitimate or sinful, you'll have a lot of guilt and shame. You just keep repeating and rinsing, repeating and doing it. You know what? Your conscience will just get burned out and it won't bother you anymore. And that's a very dangerous lock that sometimes people fall into. You know, we talk about it, you know, it's like we're these rats on a wheel, you know, where we just kind of, we feel like that. And that's kind of what he had gotten in life, where he had been living life and just like we call it what, the rat race, right? And you just keep chasing after what? You ever watch a mouse like in a maze, or you know that hamster on the wheel just keeps going round and round and round and round. And what are you going to stop? Get off that thing. What are you getting out of that? You ever watch a hamster? It's the craziest thing. When they get on those things, they just keep going and going and going and going and going. It's like, and so there's been that analogy that sometimes people look at life and they go, I feel like that rat on chasing after something, that I'm always just going to be chasing that. Well, you know what? There's no rats in the race for the crown of life. And that's kind of the difference. We're in a race for crown of righteousness. That's where we're going. And if we're trying to satisfy ourselves with those things of the world, then we're just no better than that crazy hamster that's on that spinning wheel. You're just going to have to keep running, and you're never going to get satisfied, whether it's laughter, pleasure, work, building projects, whatever it might be, and wine. You're just going to have to keep indulging in that and trying to find that. I think that what is fascinating as well is the way God had created us to have those. It deals with, because a lot of those, when we get out of bounds, we get into the illicit, the sinful ones, it distracts us away. We have a choice. God has always given us a choice. Enjoy pleasure as God has established it in its proper way, or do it sinfully, and you're going to bear the result of it. And you have a choice. And so, because God wants us to enjoy, wants us to be satisfied, there's like this desire, a hole in our hearts. It's almost like we're trying to find the satisfaction. But one thing we can see is sensuality, they're dead end. It promises a lot, but we've seen that it delivers very little. And it doesn't change a lot. There's no major impact that's going to make a difference at the end of your life. A lot of these things, again, we're talking about without God, because God wants us to enjoy it. But there's a lot of things, laughter, pleasure, wine, these things, it doesn't change a lot. If anything, it creates an unsatisfiable need that can become an addiction that people get locked into. And without God, that's all you've got. That's the sad part is most people, if they're seeking pleasure from the world versus pleasure from God, then they're going to get locked in that loop of trying to satisfy something that will never be satisfied. Again, I want to reinforce, that there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Pleasure's not wrong. Because then you'd have to say, if it's wrong, then why can't I have it? And if I can have it, then that means I was created that way. So did God create me broke? Right? No. So every emotion that we have, anger even, all of those things, used in the right purpose, is very good. Used illegitimately, it's very dangerous and destructive. And it's not going to find true contentment. Don't you want to be content? I think every person, we are created to want to have a certain level of just being content. Some people can't. You hear that, right? They just can't be content with what they've got. Why? Why? Because they're lacking the spiritual satisfaction that comes from God. And so, we need to pursue the things that, one, will deliver what they promise. All the things we talked about in the world, they won't do it. We need to also pursue the things that make us better people, that change us. And also things that will satisfy our basic needs, and keeping it in that perspective. And so what I think is where we're seeing the difference is somebody pursuing it for the wrong reasons. So for Christians, what Solomon's coming to the conclusion is we need to pursue pleasure in faith and obedience to God, because we're drawing our pleasure from our relationship primarily and foremost with Him. And in our knowledge, and the more we know about God, we put our trust in God, then we have, that's our spiritual core satisfaction. That's where it comes from. Not from the chocolate, not from going out and riding rides, not from going to comedy clubs, not from going out and doing all these things in the world. They give you a temporary satisfaction, but you got to keep doing it, remember? But when you have it in God, those are just icing on the cake, man. They're beautiful. They're so much more sensible in achieving the true pleasure. But it has to be focused on Christ and on Him. And then the rest of the things, we're not even going to be attracted to the illicit side of them, the things that are against us. And the other thing is submission. Submitting to the Spirit. It's the Spirit that we're receiving from God's Word and submitting to the things which He wants. And what we'll find is when we submit, and submission doesn't sound like fun, does it? Submission doesn't sound like, I don't want to submit. We want to be free. Yeah, you know what freedom gets you, though? Freedom gets you loose and out of control. And freedom gets you into satisfying yourself and just not satisfying anything else, and you just get in that loop again. But by submitting to God's Word and God's Spirit, we'll find that all those other pleasures that He wants us to have are so much more beautiful. So much more beautiful. Because the things that we're doing are in the glory of God. See? Because God has blessed me. I understand that what I just built, I praise God for it. I accomplished this thing, I praise God for it. I got to enjoy certain things. I get to enjoy a beautiful marriage. I praise God for it, you see? And I enjoy it so much more. That's the kind of the core differences, I kind of describe it as, the sensual, the pleasure, sensational things, they're only skin deep. And that's all they'll ever go. They'll never be able to give that deep level. And it's only through having that spiritual strength of a relationship with God that's going to satisfy our spiritual needs. And then the pleasures of the world are just going to be so much more beautiful. So much more. I've always said that, especially when it comes to young people and looking at their lives, and the relationships especially, and having just any intimate relationship as they go along random and have so many of them that by the time they get married, it's not as beautiful as it could have been, right? It's ruined. It's lost a lot. And that's the way a lot of things in life are. And so we struggle to have good marriages because why? We've taken it and cheapened it through these relationships that were just casual, but they weren't casual, you see. And that's where we look at this, is that if we do things in the spiritual guidance, then those things are much more beautiful, much more powerful. And so that's lesson 2. We'll go ahead and wrap up. Any closing comments? Like I said, we're not trying to read through every verse by verse, just kind of I kind of call it like a beginner's level, but I will get back to you on that question about the pleasures of men and then the concubines. See if there's because I know in the Hebrew, sometimes in different translations, and it could be implied. Yeah. Everything. Yeah. Every intimate type of relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. We hope to see you at 9:45 for Bible study and then 10:45 for worship. And back here again, we'll be in lesson 3 next week. I do have the handouts in the back if you want to grab some for the lesson I'll have next week. Till then, God bless.